You're watching YouTube, the cable access of the 21st century. It's Wednesday, it's 4 p.m. where I am, and it's time to talk about movies and answer your questions. Welcome to Dan's World. Hello, everybody. Whoa, voice crack right off the bat. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Dan's World. We are live here on the internet. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Always the first two questions due to my own recurrent incompetence here on live streams. We have some interesting stuff to talk about today. We're going to talk about the coverage around the Mandalorian and Grogu, and specifically how the box office has been covered, because I mentioned this a little bit on charts. There was some interesting coverage that happened over the weekend. There was another article that came out subsequent to when I did charts that I thought I just wanted to address, because, you know, I like to talk about media and media literacy and all that stuff here on the channel. It's a real view getter, I'll tell you that much. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about IMAX, which may be for sale. That could be bad news or good news. Who knows? A new Robert Pattinson movie that I'd never heard of until today that looks really, really interesting. And as always, we're going to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, I will definitely get to them. If you want to send in a super chat, I read every single super chat that I get here on the show. As always, peace and love, peace and love. Please, no ranking questions, because ranking questions are a little bit difficult for me to formulate on the spot. And I want to make this an interesting show and also keep it moving along at a pretty cool pace. The audio went low, says Calm Down Rich. Well, I haven't changed anything on my end, so hopefully it's at an okay place. So if you want to have your question answered on the show, you can send it right here in the super chat. And I always try to grab a couple from the chat as well, when and where I can. So we've got a lot to get to today. Plus, I hope that somebody asks me about Survivor, and I may just talk about it anyway, because last week was the finale of Survivor, and they had what I think was their equivalent to the La La Land Moonlight moment on live television. So we may also get into that. But let's talk about the Mandalorian and Grogu. I did, of course, my whole charts episode yesterday was about the opening weekend. And I mentioned this briefly, that there was some coverage specifically in the Hollywood Reporter. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because another article came out in the Hollywood Reporter that I thought was interesting, covering the opening of the movie in what I would call spin mode. Now, if you don't know what spin is, it's often applied in the world of politics, but it can really apply to any kind of news. It is when somebody tries to put their own spin, their own take on a news story, often to make themselves look better. For example, at presidential debates, political debates, there's a spin room afterwards where you can go in and people for each candidate will put their spin on the debate and say why their candidate won that particular debate. It's nothing new. And there's always some spin in almost every news story, even if it's a quoted comment from somebody who's associated with what might be covering, what the story might be covering. Sometimes there's bad spin. At times, people can try to put a bad spin on some news, but it was really interesting to me, because I haven't seen this much open spin on a news story in quite some time. And I don't mean to pick on the Hollywood Reporter, but they consistently, over a period of a few days, all from the same author, published stories about the Mandalorian and Grogu that, to me, looks like their intention was to deflect or diffuse any criticism around the box office performance of the movie. And specifically in the last article that they released, which I think was on Monday or Tuesday, there were some things that were written in the article that didn't just seem like spin, but also seemed like kind of proactive spin, like not necessarily here's what Disney said, but the article itself seemed to be, for lack of a better word, making excuses for the Mandalorian and Grogu. So I wanted to break that down, actually fact check a lot of what's been said about the movie and its box office performance in the trades and elsewhere. And again, a lot of these points that were made in the Hollywood Reporter that I'm going to talk about have been made in other publications as well. They were all just kind of collected in the Hollywood Reporter. And if you know me, you know that I am pretty studio agnostic when it comes to coverage. This is not an anti-Disney thing. This is not an anti-Star Wars thing. This isn't an anti-Mandalorian and Grogu thing. I've defended Disney in the past. One of my biggest videos back in the old edition of Charts, when it was charting with Dan over on Fandom Entertainment, was when I defended Disney and Captain Marvel against stuff that was being said about the box office performance of that movie, because I felt that it was inaccurate. And that was a movie I didn't even particularly enjoy. So this is not about attacking one studio or attacking one franchise. It really is sort of this ongoing thing that I do of Let's look at what the media is saying. Let's look at how stories are being covered, and let's compare that to the facts so that we can all, as people that like movies and read articles and stuff, maybe become smarter consumers, or maybe just learn to investigate instead of taking everything at face value. So this is kind of what spurred it. There were three stories that ran in the Hollywood Reporter over the weekend. One of them was on Friday, which was the day that the Mandalorian and Grogu opened, talking about how it's not going to lose money and how the important thing is that it also brings in revenue to the parks, et cetera. And it seemed to me like something that a Disney rep called up somebody they knew at the Hollywood Reporter and said, hey, we want to get this story out there because we know that the movie may not blow the doors off of the box office. Then mid-weekend, there was another article in the Hollywood Reporter saying that it had made major gains, that it was going to open to over $100 million, and that more people have been showing up on Saturday, and it was looking much stronger than Disney initially thought. Of course, it didn't end up opening to $100 million plus. The final number was around $98 million for the 4-day Memorial Day weekend. So that big gain on the weekend did not result in a $100 million opening. And then this is the article that I'm really going to focus on. It was called Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu opens to a series low $98 million in North America. Does it even matter? And it goes into a litany of reasons that I think, again, are to deflect from what could be criticisms of the Mandalorian and Grogu's performance. So I want to go over some parts of this article. I don't usually like to just read articles on the air, but I think that some of what this article says, I just want to address beat by beat. So this is some of what this article said, and then I'm going to interject some of my own research and comments as we go. So the first thing the article says, it says, in terms of Mando, Disney, famous for being conservative in regards to its midweekend estimates, projected a 4-day domestic opening of $102 million on Sunday morning, thanks to out-of-this-world audience exits, including an 89% Rotten Tomatoes audience score, by far the highest for a Star Wars movie released by Disney. This is the first thing that kind of made me go, really? Because not every Disney Star Wars movie has been well received, but the idea that at 89%, it's now down to 88%, but at the time of writing this article, 89% was by far the biggest audience score on Rotten Tomatoes for a Disney movie. That kind of set my spidey senses tingling. So I went and checked. Mandalorian was, at the time of writing this article, at 89%. As I mentioned, it's down to 88%. Now, it is significantly higher than two Star Wars movies. Solo is at 63%. The Last Jedi is at 41%. No shocker there as far as the audience score. But Rogue One is at 87%. Rise of Skywalker is at 86%. And The Force Awakens is at 84%. So judging by the research that I can do on audience scores, yes, technically right now, The Mandalorian and Grogu does have the highest audience score of any other Disney Star Wars films, but it is not by far the highest score for a Star Wars movie released by Disney, because there are three others that are right there and but within 4 to 5 percentage points. So that to me seemed like a bit of artificial fluffing. Like, you could say it's the highest audience score for any Disney movie, Star Wars Disney movie, but why the by far part? It kind of inflates the audience response when it is on par with what we have seen from audiences with other Star Wars films, which, by the way, isn't bad. Like, I don't know why you have to fluff that. The article goes on to say the box office remains forever changed by the pandemic, and for any film, a $98 million 4-day opening is celebrated by the entire industry. Again, this seems a little overly flowery. Yes, the box office is definitely very different post-COVID, but I don't necessarily think that a 4-day opening around $100 million is universally celebrated by the entire industry. It says for any film. I mean, we can just go back to December, and this is the same outlet, same author with Avatar 3. It made about $102 million through its first 4 days, but the narrative around that film was that it was on the low end of what was expected and had a lot of work to do over Christmas. Which again is not necessarily untrue, but this was it just seemed like fluffing. I'm going to use this word a lot. It seemed like fluffing the idea that, like, listen, any movie opens to this, it's cause for celebration. The whole industry celebrates that. That's not necessarily true, because there have been other movies that opened to similar numbers over 4 days that weren't necessarily celebrated. And again, it didn't say big budget. It says any movie. I don't necessarily think that reflects the case. This was another odd thing. It says openings north of $100 million have become few and far between. It seems unfathomable that 2015 Star Wars: The Force Awakens, the first franchise title released by Disney, opened to more than $257 million in its first 3-day weekend. What I take away from that is the idea that the author is saying that, post-COVID, it's unfathomable that a movie could open to the kind of number that we saw from The Force Awakens. But we have had we've had a bigger opening than that post-COVID. Spider-Man No Way Home opened to $260 million in December 2021 when theaters were still getting back up on their feet, when it was tough to get people to go out to the movies, when the theatrical marketplace was far more depressed than it is right now. We had an opening already post-COVID that was on the scale of The Force Awakens. Just a couple summers ago, Deadpool and Wolverine opened to $211 million in the middle of the summer. So the idea of it seems unfathomable to have a movie like The Force Awakens that opens to that number. Again, that seems to me as a bit of a way to sort of deflect away the idea, well, it was never going to be that big anyway, because no movie opens to as big as Star Wars movies used to open in 2015. That's not true. Post-COVID, we have seen some openings to that size. It's not unfathomable because it's happened. This is another thing the article says. Fun fact, Mando boasts the fourth best Memorial Day debut in the post-COVID times, and ahead of the $79 million debut of last year's Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which went up against Lilo and Stitch, which opened to a record-smashing $182.6 million. So again, this is true. When you look at the actual numbers, The Mandalorian Grogu did have the fourth best post-COVID Memorial Day opening weekend. But when you go back and look at Memorial Days post-COVID, Memorial Day 2020, nothing was in theaters. Theaters were closed, so obviously. 2021, A Quiet Place Part 2 opened to $57 million. Again, theaters had really just reopened. I mean, A Quiet Place Part 2 was one of the first major movies to get a nationwide release. Many theaters are still under restrictions. It was impressive that it opened to what it did, but Memorial Day 2021, I don't think you can look at as a normal Memorial Day weekend. 2022, Top Gun Maverick opened to $160 million. That's true. 2023, The Little Mermaid from Disney opened to $118 million. That's higher than what we saw with Mandalorian and Grogu. 2024 was one of the worst Memorial Days. I think the worst Memorial Day on record, with Furiosa and Garfield opening to like 31, 32 million apiece. So that was a terrible year for Memorial Day. So it is true, Mandalorian and Grogu did better than that. And then last year, as they mentioned, Lilo and Stitch did 182 million. So it does sound good to say, hey, this is the fourth best Memorial Day opening weekend for a movie post-COVID. But what you're really saying when you say that is, of the four post-COVID Memorial Day weekend movies that made a lot of money, The Mandalorian and Grogu came in fourth out of four. But hey, it beat the number 2 movie last year. That, to me, again, it seems like you're sort of using the numbers to boost artificially what the movie's reputation and kind of glaze the performance of this film. And by the way, it wasn't a terrible performance. It was an okay performance. It was a fine performance. It wasn't exceptional in any way. We'll see where it goes from here. It did have a much lower budget point than Solo, which definitely works in its favor. And that's what's kind of curious to me about this is it seems like this concerted effort to boost or glaze and fluff the opening of a movie that did okay, which to me says that Disney is really, really anxious and wants to get the word out there that, hey, this movie didn't do so bad because so many people are looking at it. And it's the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. So this is where it gets a little bit more in the weeds. The article says, so far this year, only one film has opened north of $100 million domestically, the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which is true, opened to $131.7 million. The pick is a blockbuster, to be sure, with more than $980 million in ticket sales to date. So that's a domestic opening versus a global box office number. But playability has seen films such as sleeper hit Project Hail Mary open to $80.5 million on its way to grossing north of $675 globally. So again, that's a domestic opening number set next to a global number. And Lionsgate's Michael Jackson biopic opened to $97 million domestically and is about to jump the $800 million mark globally. Again, domestic opening number, global gross. All share one thing in common. They're PG-13 films playing to all audiences, even Gen Zers and families. Favreau's film has every chance of repeating this pattern. I don't think it does. And this gets into more of the analysis side of things, but I don't think it does. I mean, first of all, you're putting, as I said, the domestic opening number of a movie next to the global box office receipts. And what they're not mentioning here is that the Mandalorian and Grogu had a very similar opening globally to Project Hail Mary, but it was way behind the openings for Michael and also the opening for the Super Mario Galaxy movie. So the opening weekends of those films domestically and globally, what you're not pointing out is that The Mandalorian and Grogu had much softer international numbers than we're seeing from the other films, or at least 2 of those 3 films. So I don't think that's necessarily a one-to-one comparison here. But so the real comp that they want us to look at here is Project Hail Mary, which had better reviews, that had a higher audience score, and it was released in the spring with less competition. Michael was its major competition, and they both did very well. But when you say there's no reason that this movie can't repeat the pattern of those films, in weekend number 2, domestically, Super Mario Galaxy had a 48.3% decline. Michael had a 44% decline. Project Hail Mary had a weekend 2 decline of 32.8%. Right now, and I just saw tracking today, the estimates are that The Mandalorian and Grogu could drop maybe 60% in weekend number 2 because it's the summer and that's how it works. So I don't see it replicating the pattern of many of those movies because it's not on track to have a second weekend that even approaches the hold. Now maybe it'll surprise everybody and it'll do that, but right now the figures aren't pointing to that. So I don't see this idea that it's set up to repeat the pattern of other movies that came out in the spring, because I don't see any of the same factors really at play. The other thing I want to talk about is it's playing to families angle, because that is something I have seen in almost every single report about this film. The Mandalorian and Grogu is different. It's not as important. It's not, the stress is not on opening weekend as much because it is playing to families. It's playing to a younger audience. It's going to have a longer tail at the box office because it's playing more like a family movie. So in almost every box office story, and you see this often on charts with Dan, there are usually demographics included in the box office coverage that give you a good idea of the age demographics of who shows up to every movie. That wasn't really very present in any of the box office coverage in the major trades that I saw for The Mandalorian and Grogu. The closest thing I found was in Variety, which said that 75% of ticket sales were to moviegoers above the age of 25. And the selling point here is that this is playing well with Gen Z and with younger audiences. 75% of ticket sales over 25. 25 is the high end of Gen Z. So there's not a huge skew from what we know about from Variety as far as those ticket sales. But, I patrol a lot of different areas to find box office news. And I was pointed to some figures that came from a podcast called Behind the Screens, which is hosted by two executives from Vista Group, which is an analytics company that has access to exhibitor demographics. And this is what they said about The Mandalorian and Grogu based on what they saw from exhibitor data. They reported that the audience was only 12% under 17 years old. 43% were 45 years or older, 67% male. What they described the audience of Mandalorian and Grogu as was, quote, older male, premium seeking and highly planned. They called it, quote, the emergence of the fan man, not the fan boy. And they said also, quote, this is not the kind of data you see where people are bringing their kids. And the thing about those numbers is they also set benchmarks. So they looked at similar movies. They had a group of movies that included The Rise of Skywalker, the re-release of Revenge of the Sith, Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, the Phantom Ministry release, Captain America Brave New World, Guardians 3, Superman, and Deadpool and Wolverine. So these are all Star Wars films as well as big event movies, a lot of them from Disney, Marvel films, comic book films, etc. The numbers for the younger audiences came in under the benchmark, so the average attendance for those films. So for that group that I was talking about, the average ticket sales under 17 were 15%. For Mandalorian and Grogu, they reported it at 12%. So Mandalorian and Grogu actually skewed older, according to this data, than the data than movies that were playing to older audiences or aimed at older audiences. So I don't really see a whole lot to back up this idea that families were driving the business behind The Mandalorian and Grogu. Now, to be fair, there was a report in an IndieWire article that said that only 11% of the preview night audience was under 18, but that jumped up to 25% over the weekend. However, that article did not provide a source for that information. I tried to find the source for that information. I could not verify those numbers elsewhere. Any reference to those numbers I found referred back to that IndieWire article. So I'm not saying that information is not accurate. I'm saying that there was no source cited for that information, and I could not verify that information. Whereas, this behind the screens thing, I know what this company is. I can look into who they are. Unless they're lying about the data, I have no reason to believe that those aren't accurate numbers. And it's interesting to me because, again, the data that was highlighted in the reporting around Mandalorian and Grogu, and again, this is across multiple sources, including in THR, was that kids under 12 or kids, 13 and younger love this movie and they're giving it 5 out of 5 stars, which implied that this was going to play well with the family audience because kids were really loving it. But none of those articles really mentioned how many kids were showing up to see the movie. They just said the kids that were seeing it really loved it. So what I see here is kind of a concerted effort to push the idea that The Mandalorian and Grogu is a family film, but I don't see a lot of data supporting this kind of common now narrative that families are going to Mandalorian and Grogu more than the average Star Wars movie. And that's why it should be judged differently. I just am not finding the data to back that up, other than that's obviously one of the narratives that Disney wants out there. There were a couple more things the article said. One of them said Disney continues to point, and again, this is quoting a Disney rep directly. Disney continues to point out that Mando began its life on the small screen, so it is an entirely different proposition from previous titles in the Star Wars pantheon and introduces new characters not tied to the saga movies or standalone features, which, fair enough, Mandalorian and Grogu did start on Disney Plus, but that show is now almost 7 years old, and Grogu specifically has kind of been the face of Star Wars for many years now. It's not like Mandalorian and Grogu launched last year, and they followed that up with a movie the year after in theaters. It's been around for several years now. So yes, I agree to an extent that it may not have as much appeal to fans of Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, etc. But I also don't necessarily agree with this idea that we should, again, recontextualize the performance because it was a streaming movie, because The Mandalorian and Grogu are very firmly established in the Star Wars canon and Star Wars mythology. So factually, yes, I agree. I think that's a factor, but I wouldn't say that should take a whole lot of flack as far as what the movie did. And then this is another thing, and this is another common thing. Again, you find this in every single almost article covering the box office for the movie. The studio says, box office aside, Mando will drive significant value across the broader Disney ecosystem, including consumer products and Disney+. The Mandalorian is the most watched original series in the history of the service, with more than 1.3 billion hours streamed globally, although I think season 1 and 2 are doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. Star Wars attractions at Disney's parks are also in on the action, including a new Mandalorian and Grogu mission within Smuggler's Run that debuted day and date with the film, a first ever for the company. And there's also a major integration with Fortnite. Again, this is true. And this is true of so many movies. That's why I always would say when I would do my box office breakdowns here on the show, which I'm considering bringing back, because honestly, I don't think that the trades have any more devotion to bringing accurate information than I would. So why shouldn't I just do box office breakdowns, giving it my best shot? But I always said ancillary revenues don't go towards box office totals. They should be considered, but I don't necessarily think they should be considered. For me, a movie is a box office story in one aspect, and you should judge the box office as its own thing. But you can also look outside of that to the ancillary income for a film. But this is more intermingled than I've ever seen ancillary revenue when it comes to a box office story, because it's almost like, well, the box office doesn't even matter, because it's all about the ancillary revenue. And it's true. If The Mandalorian and Grogu goes to Disney Plus and gets great viewership, for example, that'll draw ad revenue. If people go back and watch old episodes of The Mandalorian, that will drive subscriptions and ad revenue. Smuggler's Run, I guess maybe some people went to Disney to go to the new Smuggler's Run mission. I don't know if that would necessarily change if there were a Mandalorian and Grogu movie in the theaters or not. I don't know how many people would go see the movie in theaters and say, we've got to go to Disney. That would be a pretty small number, but sure, the inclusion of a new mission on Smuggler's Run could drive attendance at the parks. The Fortnite integration, I mean, that's great. It doesn't appear to have driven a huge amount of the young audience to see the movie, but that's great for visibility. But to me, it's just interesting that especially with THR, which ran, I would argue, 3 separate articles over the course of about 5 days that almost read like in defense of The Mandalorian and Grogu. The backup for a lot of that, I think, is flimsy in some cases. At some cases, I think it's sort of trying to shift attention away from the box office. I think in some cases, it's just not particularly accurate information, or it is presented in a way that kind of skews and makes The Mandalorian and Grogu look better. But I think it's very clear that Disney is very invested in making sure that this movie is not painted as a box office failure. And by the way, it's way too early to paint the movie as a box office failure. Again, the opening was fine. It was okay. But why I wanted to devote so much time to this on the show is that This is present in entertainment media and regular media everywhere, where you'll see an article that has a sort of sheen of objectivity, but I think underneath it may be looking to push the reader one way or another. And that's what this feels like to me. It doesn't feel like to me we took an objective look at the Mandalorian and Grogu, and we are going to break down everything sort of in black and white, cold hard facts. This to me looks like somebody who had a PR contact at Disney who was on the phone with them and was giving them quotes and kind of said, "Hey, listen, the movie's actually doing well, and here's why." And they kind of wrote that up and posted it. That's what it feels like to me. And we've talked about box office stories all the time. When Sinners came out, I talked about the fact that it seemed like maybe studios were putting their thumb on the scale in a negative way because they wanted to downplay how well that movie was doing because it had the ownership structure of that film was different. And it didn't really seem like fair play to me on that side. I think you see this a lot, especially in the trades and especially in entertainment journalism, where it's not lies, but I think that there is an agenda at play. And I'm not sitting here calling Disney corrupt or THR corrupt, but this is really just for me an exercise in pointing things out to say, read behind the story. Do your own research behind a story. If somebody says something that seems kind of weird to you, or you think maybe that fact might be presented out of context, look into that because sometimes it's not. Sometimes the fact is the fact, but sometimes there could be another agenda or another motive at play. And again, this is not an attack on Disney or anyone specifically. This was just to me very obvious. I cover box office every week. I have for many, many years now. This was maybe the most concerted effort I have seen to kind of put on a show and dance over here to distract from what I think is a mediocre box office opening. That really puts pressure on the continued run of the movie. And instead it's like, no, look at this. Look at Disney Plus. Look at the ancillaries. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. It's post-COVID anyways. Everything is like, well, because it just seemed like excuses to me. So, that's what we do. That's what I do here on the channel. Media literacy. I think it's important. And I don't necessarily think that all of the media coverage around the Mandalorian and Grogu was painting things in the light that it should, which again, I think is ironic because it's not a bad, horrible light to begin with. It did okay. It did fine. But Disney, I think, wants the perception that this was an absolute success because they need Star Wars to be viewed as an absolute success. So anyway, that's my story on the Mandalorian and Grogu. Before I get to your questions, a couple other things I wanted to cover real quick. IMAX, one of the standouts of the theatrical exhibition business post-COVID, and this is something we talked about on charts a lot before, IMAX's growth and recovery has been quicker, has been accelerated compared to the overall theatrical exhibition industry because many directors are now kind of catering to that premium experience, and many moviegoers are seeking that premium experience. Well, as with anything that does incredibly well and is a company not owned by anybody, reportedly IMAX is exploring a sale. They're thinking about selling the company. They've reportedly talked to a number of potential buyers. There have been no confirmed potential buyers. There has been speculation that Sony or Netflix or Apple or the dreaded private equity could be on the table. But I don't have great feelings about this. One of the things I like about IMAX is it has sort of been this shark that could swim in the choppy, blood-filled waters of the theatrical exhibition industry because it's not attached to any particular studio. The studios are actually going after IMAX. They're trying to lock in those IMAX contracts like we saw with Dune and Avengers Doomsday. IMAX is the belle of the ball. If you can secure a 3-week IMAX run, that's great. Greta Gerwig with the Narnia movie and Netflix, they did business with IMAX because that was attractive to that filmmaker. I like that IMAX is a free agent in the exhibition business. It's working for them. I think it's a positive for moviegoers. If the company gets sold, particularly to a studio, then I think that all that changes. If the company gets sold to private equity, I don't even want to think about the potential consequences of that. But I would be very sad to see IMAX get sold because I think that you do need those independent arms of the exhibition business in order to, in many ways, keep studios honest and keep them from being complacent. And if IMAX were now owned by Netflix, let's say, or owned by Sony, well, then you start getting a heavy stress on exclusives from that particular company, or you get the what we've seen with so many other businesses, especially if private equity is the buyer, where you strip out the features, you strip out what people love because it must become as lean and profitable as possible. Now, I'm sure IMAX is very profitable, but a lot of times if something gets acquired, look at what's happening with Alamo Drafthouse, for example, which was at one time kind of a shining star in the exhibition business and is now really weathering some tough times and criticism because they've made changes that many think are fundamentally opposed to what the company was founded on. I did a whole video about it right here on the channel. So this to me is not great news. It doesn't sound like IMAX is in trouble. It doesn't feel like they need to sell. It seems like they're doing well. And the people behind the company said, well, we can make a lot of money right now if we sell this company to somebody, and they may be doing that. I mean, fair play to them. You built something great. Sure, you're more than free to sell it, but I'm not particularly in favor of that because I think it just opens the door to, let's just say, ruining one of the great things about the exhibition industry right now. And people say, "Oh, you're cynical. You're cynical." I may be cynical about it because I've seen this happen so many times before, and I can't really think of many times when the outcome of a sale or a merger in the exhibition industry or in the movie business has been positive in the last several years. Usually it's a net negative. So this does not excite me. I've got to be honest. This does not excite me. All right. One last thing before we get to your questions. And this was a movie I didn't even know about until today. I got the trailer link sent to me through the PR emails that I get. And I try to keep my ear to the ground on stuff, unless it's stuff that young people like Backrooms, in which case I'm totally ignorant of it because I'm old and I'm losing touch. And I think you just have to acknowledge that. But this is a movie from Robert Pattinson, who I contend is one of the best actors working today, and certainly makes one of the most interesting choices. It's a movie called Prime Time. It's being released by A24 later this year. And in the movie, Robert Pattinson plays Dateline NBC's Chris Hansen, who was the host of a very popular segment on the show that eventually got spun off into its own show called, you may have heard of this, it's called To Catch a Predator, where they would basically have people pose online as underage boys or girls to then lure people who had bad intentions to a house to meet up for, again, very bad things. And then Chris Hansen would come out. I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC. And they would film him confronting these people. And then they would leave the house, and then outside of the house, they would be arrested by police. Now, To Catch a Predator was criticized for many things over the years. It was an extremely popular show and segment of Dateline NBC, but its methods were criticized. The outcomes were criticized. A lot of it was critical, and that led to it eventually ending. Chris Hansen still runs true crime stuff, and he's still doing, stuff with the police. But this is obviously set in sort of the heyday of To Catch a Predator. So the idea of a movie being made about this is interesting. There was a documentary about it at Sundance, I think, last year that I thought was interesting. But Robert Pattinson as Chris Hansen, I never would have thought. But this is a little snippet from the trailer, and I've got to say, our Pats nails it.
You see how this looks, right? I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC. And you're about to be a part of television history.
I mean, I think he got you see how this looks, right? I mean, the inflection on it, I think was perfect. It does feel a bit like an impression, but not like the uncanny version. This could be a terrible movie. I don't know, but this is a movie I knew absolutely nothing about. Hadn't even heard of it. And then it just drops in my inbox today. And I'm like, oh, wow. Well, put that on the list because I did not anticipate that as one of my must-see movies of 2026. So, yeah, Robert Pattinson, To Catch a Predator movie coming later this year. I'm excited. All right, let's get to your questions and your thoughts and see what you want to know about now. And we will go back to, I had some stuff come in even before the show started. So a lot of people chomping at the bit today. This is from The Gray who says, you're funny, handsome, and smart. Fan from day one. Well, thank you. The Gray says, your check is in the mail. Al109 says, is there a show you miss binge watching? I'm almost done with college, and I'll miss binge watching Breaking Bad and My Hero Academia. There are a lot of shows that I don't watch when they first start, and then I'll go back and I'll binge watch like the first 1 or 2 or 3 seasons. I did that with Breaking Bad, actually. I think leading up to the season 3 finale, I think. I watched the first 2 seasons and then caught up with the show by the end of that season, and that was so much fun. Um, there was another show I did that with not too long. I did that with not Succession, with Severance. I binge watched the first season of Severance so that I could watch season 2. For me, I like doing that with shows where I can catch up on it quickly. I did that with the first season of The Pit. I binge watched the whole first season, and now I'm a week to week watcher. But there aren't a whole lot of shows anymore that I just sit and watch nonstop because I'm usually doing other things. So there's not really any that I used to watch all the time that I stopped binge watching. But what I do like actually is to get into a show, maybe not from the very beginning, but to be able to watch the first season or two in a compressed time frame, because it feels like I'm able to become a fan of that show a little bit more quickly and then jump right into the continuing narrative. The Boys, I did that with as well. I think I binge watched the first 2 seasons, or maybe just the first one. The Agent Slash says, "Hey Dan, finally getting into Star Trek soon. Congratulations! Watching the original series, TNG, and the movies. What order should I watch them in? TOS, TNG, then all the movies, or TOS, the TOS movies, TNG, then the TNG movies? That is the order. So watch the original series, then watch Star Trek 1 through 6." The motion picture Through the Undiscovered Country. That'll take you through the original crew, because canonically there's a 80-year time jump just about between the original series movies and Star Trek: The Next Generation. So watch the original series, watch Star Trek 1 through 6, then watch The Next Generation. If you want to, you can see when Deep Space Nine started airing, and you can maybe intersperse Deep Space Nine, because I know there are some storylines that cross over between TNG and Deep Space Nine. But after you get to the end of Star Trek, The Next Generation, and after you're caught up to where, if you're watching Deep Space Nine, only catch up to where the end of season 7 of TNG was, then yes, you can watch the TNG movies, starting with Star Trek Generations, which is a kind of a crossover thing between the original series and The Next Generation, and then watch all of those movies all the way through. So yeah, no, I would not watch the series first and then the movies. I would go series, movies, series, movies. That's my recommendation. Ferris EB says, "Sorry if you said before, but who drew your cable access illustration for the top of the show?" That actually, well, I wish I knew the original artist. So what that is, when I first start the show, it says, "You're watching YouTube." Here, I'll just play a little snippet of it, just so you can see it. You'll hear the audio from the intro. Don't worry, I'm not starting the show over.
You're watching YouTube, the cable access of the 21st century.
So that is actually a piece of art that used to air at the beginning of every Wayne's World sketch on Saturday Night Live. So it would say, "You're watching cable access Aurora." So it's that. I took a screenshot of that image, and then I just went in and did some very basic Photoshop. I put the Jaws poster on the wall. I put the hat and the glasses and the plaid shirt. If you'll notice, the opening graphics for the show are designed like Wayne's World, and that's kind of what I felt like. Is like, this is the equivalent of a cable access show, basically, as is most of YouTube. So I don't know who the original artist is. It's whoever did the art for Saturday Night Live at the time, and then I just went in and did some very basic Photoshop stuff to make it look kind of more me. Svenus97 says, "Hey Dan, what other film fest would you like to go to now that you've been to Sundance? Budget unlimited." Budget unlimited? Cannes, number 1. I would love to go to the Cannes Film Festival. That would be number 1 on my list. Number 2 would be Toronto. I'd love to go to TIFF. And then after that, I want to go back to Sundance. Telluride, I hear, is actually a great festival. South by Southwest, I've never been to. I'd love to go to that. I was supposed to go to Fantastic Fest last year, had to cancel that due to budgetary reasons. But number 1 would be Cannes, and be able to actually, if budget is unlimited, like, stay in a place close to the action, get as many tickets as I can to the screenings. Yeah, that's number 1 on my list. Emir Hades says, "How has film discourse on YouTube changed in 10 years?" Well, that's a very interesting question. I think it's become much more segmented. And I also think that it's become, in many ways, less about each specific movie itself and more about sort of drawing a line or a camp. Like, I'm in a camp that's pro or anti this. And this is not all movie discourse, by the way. There's a lot of movie discourse that I think does it the way that it was always done. But I think that where a lot of success has been found is in sort of drawing a line and saying, these are the kinds of movies and franchises that I like, and these are the kind that I don't, and sort of focusing the channel through that lens. Pro and anti, whether that's pro or anti Star Wars, pro or anti Disney. So I think that it has become less about how a person feels about each individual movie and more about what team am I on, and how can I cover basically everything through that lens. And I think that there's some ideological stuff that's mixed in there too. So I would say it's become much more about seeing everything through a specific point of view and less about taking movies each on their own. Lochnar says, have you started Widow's Bay? Great show. Watch it. I've not. I've heard good things about Widow's Bay. Maybe that'll be one of those shows that I binge watch after it's already started. I heard good things. Asa Fadelman 4004 says, hey, Dan, from the other side of the world where it's midnight now, just had success getting my 2-month-old to sleep. And because of that, I'm catching the show live for the first time. No questions here. Just loving your work. Well, thank you. And congratulations on getting your 2-month-old to sleep. My best friend and his wife have, she's almost 1 now, but my niece was born last year. And I just have nothing but compassion for them and those nights of like sleep for an hour, get up for 2, sleep for an hour and a half, get up for I can't imagine. So it's one of the few times I would not be offended if you said that you fell asleep or you put me on while you went to sleep, because get some rest. You deserve it. Jelly Rings 22 says, I know you don't game too often, but I'm curious if you're interested in 007 First Light. It's getting great reviews so far. Also, are there any movie franchises you'd like to see get a video game installment? Thanks. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've actually been a little bit more into gaming lately when I have the time. I've been playing Lego Batman, Legends of the Dark Knight, because I love Batman. It's my favorite superhero, and I love the Lego games. And it's been a really fun game to play so far. So I usually play like one video game a year, and this has been the one I've played when I can so far this year. So I do tend to play, if I play games, a lot of them are movie games or like Red Dead Redemption 2, stuff like that. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in the 007 First Light game. James Bond games, Nintendo 64 was built on GoldenEye. And I've actually enjoyed playing a few different James Bond games over the years. So that's probably going to be a game, especially if the reviews are great. I would imagine that's going to be a game I'll invest in at some point and play, because I love James Bond movies and I love a well-played action spy type game. Sparkle TWI 2075 says, hi, Dan, how come we rarely see G ratings anymore? Well, I think that to many people, a G rating is considered to be almost counterintuitive at the box office, because they think that anybody who doesn't have kids or isn't a kid won't see it, because they'll think it's too juvenile for them. So a lot of times studios will prefer a PG rating, because I think a lot of, especially like teenagers and people in their 20s, will go see a movie that's rated PG because they don't think that it's too baby for them. So I think there's a perception that the G rating just marks something as too juvenile, when that's not necessarily the case. Juan Leche 250 says, from one hat lover to another, roughly how many hats do you own? I own a lot of hats. I mean, own or wear. I don't wear a huge variety of hats. This is my favorite hat. I actually just bought multiples because it's hard for me to find an everyday hat that I love to wear. I'd say I own probably like 50 hats, if not more. But I don't wear most of them. I just kind of like to have them on display, and I'll wear one every once in a while. But yeah, I own a lot of different hats, but I don't wear a lot of different hats. Gerardo A. Ariano says, thoughts on the World Cup? Who are you rooting for aside from the U.S.? I'm not a huge football/soccer fan. Not that I don't like it, but I generally just watch every 4 years when it comes time for the World Cup. So I don't know if I'm necessarily rooting for or against any team in particular. I hope the U.S. does well. Obviously, the fact that it's in the United States is a big thing for us this year. But I don't have a huge allegiance to any particular team. Yeah, can't really say that I do. Freakstomp95 says, I use YouTube channel Nerd of the Rings before watching Rings of Power to be well informed on the lore, and use Screen Crush for a summary on a past season of a show to be caught up on a new season. Have you? Yeah, I've definitely done that. I will often do that. I did that with The Boys, for example, because I've seen every episode of The Boys, but it has been a while since the last season and a few years since I watched the first season, and I don't rewatch shows a lot. So I will often go to any number of channels. Sometimes it's one of the bigger channels like a Screen Crush, or sometimes I'll find one that seems like a smaller independent creator who does a good job. And I'll bail sometimes if I don't feel like it's a good summary. I'll find another one. But yes, I use it more often to
give me a refresher on a show that's been gone for a long time and that I might have forgotten stuff about, than I will to like get a lore backdrop. If anything, I'll do that after I watch a show. But yeah, I do that to help refresh myself on shows all the time. Fedwin says, have you ever checked out My Hero Academia? Its final season just won Anime of the Year last weekend. No, I haven't. I remember Joe Starr talking about that way back in the Screen Junkies days. My anime knowledge they're just so daunting, a lot of these shows. So I have not, but I've heard it's very good. Geek Factor says, hi, Dan. If you were to pick a team to sit down with, have a beer, can be non-alcoholic, and talk movies, it's you and Jeremy Johns. Easy. No question. Just love. So if you wanted to pick a team to sit down and have a beer, talk movies. I love Jeremy. Jeremy came in and did some stuff with Screen Junkies when I was there. He lived in LA for a very brief period of time. And I saw him a little bit more frequently. He and I went and saw, I think, Force Awakens. It was either Force Awakens or Last Jedi. I'm pretty sure Force Awakens. I went and saw the media screening at Disney. I think he was my +1 to go see Force Awakens. Jeremy and I have always gotten along. I don't talk to him that often. We exchange emails maybe about once a year, but I've always been a fan of Jeremy's, and I've always had a great friendly relationship with him. He's a fun guy to talk to. So yeah, I mean, I just love to do that in general. Yeah. Dylan Fitzsimmons 2278 says, thoughts on Louis C.K. pre and post scandal. Jeez. Wow. We took a hard turn here. Thoughts on Louis C.K. pre and post scandal. Pre-scandal, and I'll argue that the material still holds up. I think that he was one of the most brilliant stand-up comics, certainly right now. I mean, I still listen to his stand-up from older years. I haven't heard a lot of his newer stuff. I still listen to his stand-up from older years, and I think that he was a fantastic stand-up comedian. I loved his material and how it was written. He certainly walked a lot of lines and tiptoed along a lot of lines. And I know some people were not fans of that, and I understand that, but I thought he was a brilliant comedian. I loved his show on FX. I loved Louis. Obviously, what came out about him, I think, was pretty horrific. Not the worst of the worst in the sense of like, if you're going to put things on a scale, but obviously he did things that made a lot of people uncomfortable and affected a lot of people's lives in a negative way. And it's not that I don't think there's a road back from that. I think that there is. I think somebody can go and be introspective and work on themselves and come back and ask for forgiveness. It doesn't seem like to me he really did that step. It seemed to me like he kind of just waited it out and then came back and said like, well, never, it just waited for enough people to be okay with it. And then just sort of resumed. I don't know if he'll ever be as big as he was before, but I maintain that he, and probably still is, a great stand-up comic. Again, I haven't heard a lot of his recent stuff, but I was a big fan of Louis. I was very disturbed by what came out about him, and I wasn't necessarily a fan of how he dealt with his comeback. Just my 2 cents there. Black Bag V says, life has been hard lately, and I lose my will to go on day by day. You've been one of many lighthouses in my life. Sitting down with you and talking movies makes it all seem normal and livable. Thank you. I love your work. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I appreciate that my channel and other things are sort of helping you get through the day. My recommendation would be, I understand it. Life can be really tough and really difficult and really, really hard sometimes. Everybody's been through those times. There have been times these last couple of years I haven't had such a great run of it myself. What I will say is while it's great that you're able to find people on YouTube and people who do streams and content and stuff to help you get through the day, I would desperately urge you to also reach out to somebody, whether that is a family member, a friend, a loved one, someone you trust. I don't know where you're located, but there are many resources that are also available. If you're struggling day by day, because, as great as it is, and I've certainly used YouTube and video games and movies and whatever else as a distraction, I do think that talking to somebody and having someone you can confide in is critically important, because the thing to remember is that the world is a much better place with you in it. So I appreciate that the channel and everything that I do has been a comfort to you and assist and helped you, but also I just, please reach out to somebody. You are valued, you are loved. I can promise you. It's as tough as life is. I can promise you also that there are easier times past that. And Just find that person, whoever it may be, whatever resources are available to you, or even just a trusted friend, family member, somebody who can support you in a more personal way. But I'm happy that this can help you get through the day. And best wishes to you. I hope things get better. And stick around with us because there's a lot. The Robert Hansen, the Chris Hansen, Robert Pattinson movie's coming. So, hang in there. Absolutely. Dylan Fitzsimons 2278 says, movie fights question. Which two characters would you most share a bunker with, a la 10 Cloverfield Lane? Meaning, like, who would I want to share a bunker with? Ooh. I mean, I'm assuming this is not going into like the whole twist part, like, one of them's evil and blah, blah, blah. It's more just like, who would I want to chill with down in a bunker forever? I mean, the dude, I'd say Jeff Lebowski, the dude, because he's always going to have something interesting, and he's probably brought some refreshments that might help pass the time. So I'd say the dude. Talk to him about what's going on in the 60s. I'm sure he's got some wild stories. And I mean, I think it's just somebody that would make the experience enjoyable. Maybe somebody funny. So the dude is pretty funny. Who would be my second? It'd be the dude. And I know when people would say like, oh, Black Widow, or, like get a hot girl down there, but it's like, I don't even want to go in that direction. To at this point, it's just like, let's just make it bearable. Because you don't want things to get awkward or weird, and it just opens too many doors. I don't know. The genie maybe from Aladdin? That'd be entertaining, and he could just wish us out of there. So the dude and the genie from Aladdin. How about that? Drew Skizzy says 65 to 67% drop feels likely. I'm guessing that's for Mandalorian. My prediction, 26.75 to 28.5 million. It missed $100 million 4-day. Tuesday was below Solo and Backrooms. The Gen Z walk-ups are coming. That's the interesting thing, is like the strategy and the narrative behind Mandalorian was that Gen Z was so behind it. But I think that with Backrooms, we're really going to see the strength of Gen Z. Dylan Fitzsimons 2278 says, thoughts on Chappelle's show. I love Chappelle's show. I watched it. It hit peak for me. It was on when I was in college. So you couldn't, I remember, was it 2003, 2004? It must've been like 2004, 2005, because I was legally walking in and out of bars, but you couldn't, at closing time for like 6 months, all you heard were people screaming what? Okay. Like the Lil Jon thing from the Dave Chappelle show sketch. The Wayne Brady sketch, the Rick James sketch, like all of that stuff was like peak for me. I think that was a brilliant show. I mean, obviously Dave walked away from it. That was his right to do that. I would have preferred that he not make something that he was really invested in, or that he didn't think he could deliver. I think Chappelle's show is fantastic sketch comedy. Some of it is maybe a little more relevant to the 20 plus years when it was on. Some of it I think is pretty damn relevant still. So I think it's a fantastic show. Damian Fenton says, hi, Dan. If a time traveler offered to show you one movie-related Wikipedia article from 2036, what would you pick? One movie-related Wikipedia article from 2036, so 10 years into the future. I'd want the list of major studios. So what are the major studios in 2036? Does Paramount have WB? Did they stay together? Did they have to divest? Are they two different ones? Have more studios been absorbed by other entities? Has there been a mid-major that's launched up to become one of the major ones? Did a studio fold? I'd want to know just how consolidated the industry is going to be in 10 years and who's actually going to be around. That to me would be very, very, very interesting. Nick Mesa Film says, hi, Dan, in honor of Neon reclaiming the Palme d'Or at Cannes for the seventh time, how would you personally rank their past 6 winners? All right. This is a ranking question, but I will let you slide with it. So if you don't know, Neon has been the distributor for the Palme d'Or, which is the top prize winner at Cannes, for 7 years in a row, going back to Parasite in 2019. There was no Cannes Film Festival in 2020. So if I was going to rank their past winners, so Fjord was the one that just won the Palme d'Or. I haven't seen it. It hasn't come out yet. So that would be Parasite, Titan, Triangle of Sadness, Anatomy of a Fall, Anora, and It Was Just an Accident. I would probably rank Parasite and Anatomy of a Fall, either 1 or 2. I would have to really think about that. So Parasite and Anatomy of a Fall would be up at the top. Triangle of Sadness and Anora would be a very decent second tier for me. And then Titan, I respected, but I don't necessarily, I get it. It was an interesting film, and I think interesting films have their place. It wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but it was interesting. And it's not that I didn't like it; was just an accident. I did enjoy it, but I would put it in that tier with Titan, maybe a little bit above it. Yeah, it's not that I liked. It was just an accident. It just wasn't quite at the heights of the other ones for me. So that's a rough ranking. Where does Bale rank on your Batman scale? Ranking. Okay. Up near the top. It's hard for me to displace Keaton because Keaton for me is Batman, and not just because he was the Batman when I was a kid. I just love his takes on Bruce Wayne and Batman. But Christian Bale would be 1B, and you could probably talk me into 1A on that. So very high up. Dylan Fitzsimmons, 2278. Better love story, Titanic or La La Land? Where they're completely different love stories. The tone is so wildly different, and the outcome is so wildly different. Titanic is more of the classical love story. La La Land is more of a sort of modern take on it. So I guess it depends on what kind of love story you're looking for. Titanic is more of your classic Hollywood romance for sure, but I'm more profoundly moved by the love story in La La Land and its sort of honesty about what life can be than Titanic, which is a movie I also love, but it doesn't move me in the same way. Plus, it's a deeper relationship instead of just meeting a guy on a boat for a few days. Samuel Adam Wright says, "Hi, Dan. Have you seen any of SNL UK? I'm fascinated to hear what folks on your side of the pond think of the British cultural icon that is Mr. Blobby." So I have seen, I watched the first couple episodes of SNL UK and thought they were pretty funny. I've seen some clips online. I did see the Mr. Blobby one that came out that was like the pre-tape bit where Mr. Blobby was this thing that came out, this creature that came out from underground. So Mr. Blobby, if you don't know what Mr. Blobby is, look up a picture of him, is horrifying. And Mr. Blobby was a character on British TV from the 90s. I had no idea what Mr. Blobby was until I watched Taskmaster. So Mr. Blobby was a part of Taskmaster. And then Mr. Blobby also showed up. I was watching old episodes of the Big Fat Quiz of the Year, which is a UK show that gives you, and it may have been like the Big Fat Quiz in the 90s, but it's like a panel show, but also a quiz show that you can find online. And Mr. Blobby came out. I can't really describe Mr. Blobby. I don't understand. I guess I do understand why he was so famous in the UK, but to an outsider's perspective, it looks like absolute psychopath stuff. Mr. Blobby's big and pink, and he speaks in this like high-pitched, electronically modulated voice. It's like he's like a minion. He's like a more nightmarish minion. But I do find the character funny. It's just interesting to me that he became a cultural icon because to an outsider perspective, you're like, what the hell is this? It was quite interesting. Drew Skizzy says, one last Survivor talk for now. What were your thoughts on the final? The Jeff blunder was hilarious to watch. Didn't hate the winner, but okay. Here we go. I'm going to hydrate. Here's the Survivor question. Thank you, Drew Skizzy. So if you don't know who won the latest season of Survivor, I'm going to talk about the finale a little bit. It was last Wednesday. First of all, they hadn't God, excuse me. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. I'm going to mute my mic here. I don't know. CBS doesn't want me talking about. Got me all choked up. Okay. Last Wednesday was the finale of Survivor. And after many years of not doing a live show, so usually the way that it used to work was they would have a 2-hour finale that you would watch. And sometimes Jeff Probst would like do commercial bumpers. And it's like, I'm here at CBS coming up after this. We have the live reunion show. But the first 2 hours were just what happened on the island. And then the last hour would be they go to do a live show. They'd read the winner on the live show. And then they would do an interview with all the different castaways and talk about different parts of the show. They haven't done a live show in a while. And this year they brought the live show back. But instead of doing 2 hours of show and a reunion at the end, they decided to do during the show, they would come in and do live, like interstitial bits based on what had just happened or talking to some survivors in the middle of the show. So it would kind of arrest the momentum of what you were watching and then they would talk about something, they go to commercial, they come back, you see a little bit more of the pre-tape on the island, you come back and they do a little bit more live. What happened was one of the biggest live TV production blunders I can remember. So we're at the final four, and the way that Survivor works is when you get to the final four, a lot of times it's up to the winner to choose. This was in the hands of the fans. So this time the fan chose. You can either have a vote to see who gets voted out, or you can have a fire-making contest. And when you have a fire-making contest, it's basically whoever wins immunity, which means they're in the final three. They're going to have a chance to win the game. They will pick two people to compete in who can make a fire the quickest. And whoever makes the fire the quickest goes on to the final tribal council. So they're part of the final three. Whoever loses the fire-making competition is eliminated. It's essentially you're voted out of the game. So we're at the final four. And the choices between who is making the fire are between Jonathan, this contestant Jonathan, who I thought might win the game, but did not end up winning the game, and Rizzo, who played last season. I didn't really like him when the season started, but he kind of grew on me. Both of them lost fire-making competitions at the end and didn't make the final three. So they've set up that these two are going to be making fire. Whoever wins is going to the final three. Whoever loses is going to be eliminated. So they go to commercial. They're like, all right, when we come back, the fire-making challenge begins. They go to commercial. They come back, but they don't come back on the island where they're about to do the fire-making contest. They come back to the live studio. And Jeff Probst says, all right, let's bring Rizzo out here. Remember, Rizzo is in a two-person fire-making competition, the outcome of which we do not yet know. And so he brings Rizzo out and he's talking to Rizzo, and they're talking to him for a very long time. And I'm like, that's weird. Like, are they going to bring the other guy, Jonathan, out and talk to him too? Because it seems like he's giving an exit interview and we don't even know if he made fire or not. We don't know who won this contest. So they talk, and you can see Rizzo kind of looking around, and he's giving answers like, well, no matter who wins this contest, it was a great game. But Jeff is talking to him as if it's already been done. And so at the end of it, before he throws back to the fire-making competition, again, which we don't know the outcome of, he says, all right, Rizzo, well, you played a great game. Go take your seat as the final member of the jury, which means you've been voted out of the game, which means he didn't win. So they basically put a live segment before the fire-making contest featuring the loser of the fire-making contest. And Jeff Probst is literally like, wait, what? Like, the people in the audience start murmuring. He's like, wait, what happened? I don't know what just happened. Anyway, let's go back to the show. And then, to be fair, Jeff Probst kind of made a joke of it. He's like, all right, let's watch Rizzo lose now. So they embraced it. But a screw up of that magnitude, to put in a live segment, a whole segment before the thing that you're spoiling, that is a massive screw up. And a lot of people put it just on Jeff Probst. Again, that was a production screw up. Somebody somewhere, technically, I mean, it's hard to believe how something could get screwed up that badly. That's why I say it's the equivalent of the La La Land Moonlight thing, because you spoiled the last real challenge of the season before it even aired. The ability to do that, you would think, would be baked in as an impossibility in live television, but they did that. So that was interesting to watch. I've certainly never seen that on Survivor before. The Jeff blunder, yes. So the winner. So spoiler alert, again, final spoiler alert. I talked about the fact that it's hard to be a dominant player in Survivor and get to the end nowadays. So the final three were Aubrey, Jonathan, and Joe. Joe was in the final three because everybody knew nobody would vote for him. That's just the fact. Everybody would have taken Joe. It's not that he was a bad player. He wasn't really driving anything. He was just kind of a utility vote. And so it was really between Aubrey and Jonathan. And I said, I think on the show a week or two ago, that I thought maybe Jonathan would win. And I think that he laid out a pretty good case for why he should win the game. I think that it was a lot closer than the final vote showed, but Aubrey won. She's a well-liked player. There is often a perception that she was robbed in at least one of the seasons in the past. She knew a lot of people on the jury because they were former players. And what has emerged post-episode is that Jonathan did a horrible job of managing the jury, in that nobody really seemed to like him that much. And I know that that really shouldn't come into play necessarily as a deciding factor on Survivor, but it does. It does matter whether the jury likes you or not, and that's just part of playing the game. So I actually thought that Jonathan played as good a game as Aubrey, or maybe even a little bit better. But none of them would have been my pick for who I think played the best game. I think that Ozzy just kind of threw the balance off. If Ozzy had played his immunity idol, Aubrey would have gone home because all the votes at tribal council would have gone to her. So she wouldn't have won the game. She would have gone home. And who knows who would have won Survivor this year? Maybe it would have been Jonathan. I don't know. But I'm okay with the winner. I think it was more of a legacy win, honestly. Not that Aubrey played a bad game. I think she did a very good job at staying alive when she was on the chopping block a lot. But she didn't play like this dominant game that I thought was incredible. Jonathan did an okay job, but a lot of the stuff I've read about him and that others have said about him after the game was like, well, he never really had a chance because he just didn't really manage things, I don't think, properly with the people that had to vote for him to win $2 million. All right, Survivor talk over. Clay 7729, very generous. Thank you very much. Clay says, hey Dan, just wanted to give you praise for your thoughts about the Lupita situation. As a black man, I feel like you handled that perfectly and with elegance. Completely agree with everything you said. You made a case that was grounded and made sense. I appreciate that. I understand that some people feel the opposite way, and that's everyone's. Everybody can have their own opinion. That's all right. But thank you very much, and thank you for that super chat. I will say that I am still in deep research on a video about the Academy Raise standards, which are their diversity standards, which apply to Best Picture, kind of driven by a little bit what I saw with The Mandalorian, which is where I would read news and get comments and stuff and say, well, that doesn't really seem in line with the how they actually work. So I know I said I've been working on that for a while. It's because it's a deep research project, but I'm getting there. And it does also tie to that same story with Lupita Nyong'o and The Odyssey, because that has been invoked in connection with the race standards by some people with very high profiles. So look out for more. But thank you very much. It's very generous, and I'm glad you enjoyed the coverage. Adeline Hudson says, just rewatch Network, and it's still the greatest movie ever, in my opinion. It's in my top 5 probably all time. I haven't seen anything else with Faye Dunaway in it. Where should I start? Well, art from the artist, I understand. If you're okay with watching a Roman Polanski film, I think that Chinatown is a great place to start with Faye Dunaway because she's fantastic in that movie. Bonnie and Clyde also. If you have not seen Bonnie and Clyde, you don't have to do any of that separating the art from the artist stuff there. That was one of her, kind of her breakout role. And I think that is a wonderful movie with Faye Dunaway in it. Mommy Dearest is one that a lot of people kind of play up for the camp factor. But I think that her performance in that movie is, some people think it's one of the greatest performances of all time, and some people think it's one of the worst performances of all time. But if I was going to recommend one, I would say Bonnie and Clyde, because she is great, and I think she shows a lot of different sides than what you see in Network. But I agree, Network is one of the best movies ever made. Real Rush Bag Treaty. Real Rush Bag of Treaty. Sorry. What were your favorite theaters in the LA area, whether it was overall for specific things like premium showings, indies, etc.? Have a great week. Well, the Vista Theater in Los Angeles was for a long time my local theater and my favorite theater in town, and it was closed for a while. I have not been back to it since it was bought by Quentin Tarantino and reopened, but the Vista was always my favorite and my go-to. The ArcLight, which was closed due to the pandemic, and there's been nothing that replaced it, was great because it had that kind of more premium feel to it, and they had ushers. They had people that would check in on the movie and check the picture and sound quality. And even though it was showing its age a little bit, it still, I think, was in pretty good shape. It was comfortable, and the Cinerama Dome was great, even though that has now been closed since COVID. It's criminal that the dome at least has not reopened. But the Vista for me was always my go-to, and it was fun to see throwback stuff at the New Beverly as well. But I always loved the Vista. That was my favorite. Jerry Shue says, consideration for M&G soundtrack for Oscar. I liked the movie well enough, but I felt the background music was doing some heavy lifting. Mandalorian Grogu soundtrack. I agree. For me, the Ludwig Göransson score was the best part of the movie. I think he's got some other high-profile projects that may take precedence, but I loved his work in the film. M. Moses 2991 says, does it bother you as much as me when movie posters don't match the names up with the actors above their head? Why? Is it really that hard to just move the names above the actors? Grinds my gears. Well, I get it. I think what you have there are two different, equally important branches that are fighting. You have the graphic designers and the people that are designing the poster, who are saying it looks better with the actors in this order or oriented in this position. And you have the contractual requirements for each actor. So for a lot of actors, in their contract, they will negotiate first billing, meaning either the first name on the poster, or top 3 billing, which means they're one of the top 3 names in the poster, or second billing, or an and credit. If they can't get the top credit, they get the and or with credit. So it still sets them apart. And so what the graphic designer wants and what makes the best poster and what the contract says the order of the actors' names are doesn't always line up. It does drive me crazy as well. In a perfect world, you would be able to do that. Just line up the actors in order of who they are on the poster. But it's two separate sides of the business, and neither of them can really change what they do to placate the other one. Clay7729 says, wanted to ask, we know how you feel about Ebert, but what are your thoughts on Siskel and Roper? And did you have a favorite? I think I'm a Roper guy. Well, I think that Siskel was a great counterpoint to Ebert because he was more of, he always struck me as more of the everyman. He would sort of break through. I think that at times Roger Ebert could be a little elitist. Siskel could too, to be fair. But I think at times Roger Ebert could be a little elitist or we kind of get a wild hair about something. And Siskel always seemed like kind of that voice of the common man saying like, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? Like that's insane. And they would go back and forth about it. So I think that they really made a great pair because Siskel seemed a little bit more grounded. Ebert was oftentimes a little bit more wrapped up in his own thing and would go on these crazy flights of fancy. Roper to me I liked Roper. I didn't dislike Roper, but he seemed like a modern, media movie critic. I never got the personality. I think that he and Ebert matched well on their personality and that they worked well together, but I never got the clash between the two of them. They couldn't replicate that chemistry that he had with Siskel, which I don't think anybody could have. So I like Roper. He's also got some nutty opinions from time to time. But Siskel for me was always the one that just, that was lightning in a bottle. And I think that he was a good counterbalance to Ebert. I don't necessarily know if Roper was a great counterbalance to Roger Ebert. Eddie A. Johnson TV says, why are movies and TV shows so visually dark? I get things being darker to save on VFX, but it's everywhere. First, it was poor sound mixes. Now this. I don't know if I've noticed them getting a lot more dark, but I think part of it is digital video. So when you shoot something on digital video, you can push the darkness a lot more than you could necessarily with film. Shooting dark on film was always a little bit tougher. Shooting dark on digital video is a lot easier. And this was a factor when I know Game of Thrones, when they did their Winterfell episode, when you are color correcting, when you're doing the post-production for a TV show or a movie, you are looking at them on the best and most optimized monitors in the best possible surrounding. And that doesn't necessarily, number one, match the settings and the quality of everything that a consumer has at home. And number two, when something goes to streaming specifically, there can be some compression involved that sort of crushes that color profile and makes the darks darker than they looked when you're looking at the uncompressed footage. So I think it's a combination of the switch from digital video and also the fact that when because you can shoot darker on digital, sometimes that doesn't always read as well at home. And so people say, what, that's way too dark. And then some things are just shot way too dark. I'll agree with that. Alien versus Predator Requiem. That was just shot too dark from the beginning. Real Serious says, the fact that we're getting a Robert Pattinson, Chris Hansen movie means there's a greater than zero chance we will get a Bill Hader, Keith Morrison spinoff. That'd be great. So Keith Morrison is also a journalist on Dateline NBC, and Bill Hader does a great impression / caricature of him. So what they say? It's really funny. I'd watch that movie. Crimson 00 Phoenix says, are any new features that you're planning for the channel? I don't know about new features. It's just really kind of keeping the tracks ahead of the train. As we get into the summer movie season, I'll be traveling a lot more. I think I have 2 consecutive weeks where I'm going to be, taking multi-hour trips to see a movie early, and that kind of throws my schedule off. So I don't know if there's any new features. It's more just working on new videos, keeping up with the videos I usually do, and trying to shake things up, but not like on a consistent basis as far as like, this is a new consistent thing on the channel. Gakuka says, do you ever go to movie themed pub trivia nights? I bet you clean up. No, I don't do a lot of pub trivia anymore. I did it in college, but it'd be fun. I'd like to do that. There's also not a lot of pub trivia around me. I mean, bar trivia, as we call it here, is big, but it's not like it is in like the UK and other places. David B. DeBomb says, would you rather binge the Minion movies or the Disney-related horror movies? Blood and Honey, 1 and 2, Pinocchio, etc. Yikes. Probably the bad horror movies, honestly. I think they're maybe more creatively bankrupt, but less annoying to me personally. Freakstomp95 says, I think you missed my question from earlier. I'm sorry, I'm looking back. I think I answered a question from you earlier. It takes me a while to get. Are you meaning the Lord of the Rings question that I talked about? Because that came in at 4:08. It takes me a while to get through all of the backlog. So I did answer your question about Lord of the Rings, which was one of the first ones I asked, and that's the only one I have for you here. So hopefully that's the one you're referring to, because I didn't miss it. I'm just now I got to refine my spot here on my super chats. Hopefully that's the question you're talking about, because we did address that on the show. Rochester Producers 8847 says, I recommend Widow's Bay on Apple. So another recommendation for Widow's Bay. Josie Melkop 196 says, suggestion for a weekly show, throwback Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where you watch and review older top-rated movies that you did not see before but still have a cult following. Thank you for the entertainment. That would be interesting. I've just generally found that there's not much interest for that on the channel. I've tried to do throwback stuff before, and I mean, that's kind of what all my movies was, and it just never really performs that well. So, I'm not totally driven by what the audience watches, but I do feel like I have to make some selective investments in my time and what I do. And I've just never really seen much indication that audiences want that from me. But I agree, that would be a fun show. Zach Likes Movie 72 says, just started Spider Noir, hoping a review is coming. I mean, it came out today, but yes, I am going to try to watch as much of it as I can. I don't know if I can get the review out for tomorrow, but I will be getting a review out for it soon, unless I see it and it's like, I don't really have much to say about it. But yeah, I'm going to watch it in black and white, by the way. I think I've decided. Ferris EB says, which Mary Elizabeth Winstead character wins in a battle of wits, not strength? Ramona Flowers, Michelle from 10 Cloverfield Lane, or Huntress from Birds of Prey? Wits, not strength. I don't know. Maybe Michelle from 10 Cloverfield Lane. I don't think Ramona Flowers. She's quippy, but I don't know if it would be like a battle of wits. And to get out of that kind of situation, I think requires some pretty smart thinking. So I'd go with Michelle from 10 Cloverfield Lane. Bobcat9 says, so is Princess and the Frog a horror movie to you? Not necessarily, because they're animated enough that it doesn't freak me out, but it's not great. But those are a little like Michigan J. Frog from Warner Brothers doesn't give me the creeps, because it's very clearly animated. More realistically, like if they were to do a live action remake of Princess and the Frog, yes, that would be a horror movie for me. Sean JI6139 says, I moved to SoCal 2 years ago, and as a fellow Arkansas transplant, it's been wild living near so many filming sites, Bronson Cave, etc. Any recommendations for some that often get, overlooked? The Back to the Future Mall is a little ways away. I think it's in City of Industry or Pacoima, but I always enjoyed going to see the Back to the Future filming sites, especially like where the mall was, because it's so you get to see that from so many different angles. And once you can get to the right angle, you're like, oh yeah, even though a lot's changed, you're like, yeah, this is totally it. So if you want to make that trip, then I think that would be really fun. The Blade Runner building, I think, is downtown. I don't know if that's really overlooked, but I never actually went. So that's fun. And then watch Nightcrawler. If you watch Nightcrawler, it's crazy how many, like on Sunset, the number of shots that are on Sunset where the Vista is, and the Del Taco, which is where I used to live. It's just kind of fun to see these everyday streets in movies. So yeah. Straight Edge Knight 19 says, favorite Batman movie, The Dark Knight for me. Yeah, it's hard to not say The Dark Knight. Batman 89 and Batman Begins are also pretty high up there for me, but it's hard to not say The Dark Knight. Crusader 38372 says, hi, Dan. Always a joy to catch you live. Following the gaming question, any chance we will ever get a playthrough stream, maybe once a week for 1 or 2 hours? However, anything you do, we will watch with love. Also, any thoughts on racing sports? F1 and F2 this year's seasons are nuts and awesome. I've never really watched racing at all, NASCAR, F1, any of that stuff. So not a whole lot of thoughts on that. Gaming, again, it seems to me like there's so many people that do it as their major focus, and they're good at it, that like I enjoy gaming. I'm not very good. So I think people would like, why am I wasting time watching this guy who can't even play video games that well? And again, I just don't know where the interest is. I don't know if people would be interested in watching that from me. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just seems like so many other people do it already and do it well. and that's the focus of their channel, I'm not really sure where it would fit in on my channel. Firo Hero says, "Hi Dan, if a movie was originally intended for streaming, but the production company later decided to release it in theaters, would the box office revenue be considered a bonus?" I mean, do you just mean in general, or like for like paying actors and stuff? I think that it would be considered an alternative revenue stream. The streaming economics around movies is so weird and so labyrinthine, but I think that it would maybe be considered an unanticipated revenue stream. But I think you'd also then have to talk to your actors who maybe sign contracts based on it being a streaming film to compensate them for it being theatrical, or else you're going to have problems, as we've seen it the other way. Adam Schmidt 625 says, "I started a YouTube channel 3 years ago talking movies, and I can't get any traction. Any advice on making thumbnails and video titles that get clicks?" I mean, listen, I have people email me daily saying my thumbnails suck and I need to make better thumbnails. And then the thumbnails they pitch look like the thumbnail for every other channel on YouTube. So I don't really take their advice, maybe to my detriment. I mean, I don't know if I'm the one to ask advice for about what gets the most clicks, because I'm very happy with my viewership, but my videos aren't exactly going viral. Because I don't think that the tricks for getting the most clicks mean that you're making the best content. I mean, I could tell you how to get clicks, which is just like find videos saying things that get a lot of clicks and make another video that says that thing as well, or something along those lines. And that'll get clicks, but is that what you want to be making? That I think is the real question. How can I, if you want to just make money, so I'll break it down into two things. If you just want to make money, then kind of ride the trends. Look at what thumbnails other channels do and copy those thumbnails. Look at what topics other channels do and copy those thumbnails, those topics. Again, I'm not saying that every channel that's successful does this. I mean, if what you're just looking for is a quick way to do it, then just do that. If you just want to make money. If you want to build a following and you want to build a channel, then I would say, yes, you should still look at thumbnails that, what works and what doesn't work. What does your thumbnail not have that maybe other thumbnails that work do have, and incorporate that while still keeping some of your identity. And also, is there something that's doing well on YouTube, or a movie that's performing well that you want to talk about, that you want to share your thoughts on? Because I've done that before. I don't necessarily make a video because I want it to go well or to do well, but if there's something that's doing well that I also want to talk about, I try to take advantage of that opportunity and say, well, I actually have something to say about this, so I'm going to do it because it seems like there's interest there. But I don't just do it because it'll get clicks. It's because I have something to say. So I would say it just depends on what your goal is. You can make any number of things that can just seize on the algorithm. But if you want to build a following and you want people to listen to the substance of what you say, optimize those things as best you can, but also kind of stay true to what you want to do. River Naiad says, "Reminder to watch Send Help if you haven't yet." I haven't, but it's on streaming, so I'm going to see it soon. And I think we're getting close to the end of the question. So if you have a question you haven't sent in yet, be sure to do that, because we're going to wrap up as soon as I get to the end of these last few questions. Let's see. Ryan Deloney 7952 says, "How do you like living in Northwest Arkansas, and do you miss LA? Coincidentally, I lived in Bentonville when I first started watching you on SJU, and now I'm in LA." Well, I hope you're enjoying LA. What do I like about living in Northwest Arkansas? I am close to my family. I'm close to my best friend of 30 years and his family, which has sort of become my family, even more so than already existed. I value being close. I think I missed that. I did not have any direct family that was close to me in California. And as my mom gets older and as I get older, I just like having that close access to family. I mostly enjoy the weather up here. I think it's a great community. It's a great vibe up here in Northwest Arkansas. And I don't miss a lot of the downsides that came with Los Angeles, the cost of living and the constant kind of chaos and the traffic and all that. I don't miss that in my day-to-day life. What do I miss? Most of all, I miss my friends. I miss my friends a lot. And I've got some very, very good friends that are still in Los Angeles. And we talk, we do Zooms, and I see them when I fly out there, but that's not the same as seeing them all the time. So I miss my friends a lot. And I also miss how much easier it was to do my job, because in Los Angeles, you never have trouble. If you can get on a screening list, you never have trouble getting into a movie early, because everybody that's in the media at some point gets an advanced screening, just about. of a movie. So the idea of traveling 3 to 5 hours to see a movie just to get a review out when the embargo's lifted, that would not exist if I lived in Los Angeles. And so that I miss. That element of my job was a lot easier. And it does hurt the channel a little bit that if there's not a movie that's screening, like Backrooms didn't screen anywhere near me. Mandalorian and Grogu didn't screen anywhere near me. There's some movies that just aren't going to screen near me, and that hurts the channel because I can't have early reviews. But the trade-off that I get for that is more. So I love it here, and it's, I feel like I've started a life here, and I've had a life in LA, and I had a life in Central Arkansas as well. But the positives outweigh the negatives, even though I really, more than anything, I miss my friends. Keen Bone says Widow's Bay is great. Humor's right up your alley. So another vote for Widow's Bay. David Beat a Bomb says, would there be any fun facts or graphs if Obsession's third weekend box office is again greater than its opening weekend, or if it's somehow greater than the second one even? Yes, and believe me, I'm going to be looking into that if that happens. I'm curious to see what the competition from Backrooms is going to do with Obsession. But this summer has already been so much fun to watch. And the fact that Obsession's doing what it's doing, and it looks like Backrooms maybe doing something more. I mean, I could have 3, 4, 5 movies that I did not pick to be in the summer top 10 in the top 10. And that's great. That means that we have a healthy, vibrant, surprising box office. I don't care if I was wrong about the summer box office. It's already been a fun summer to watch. Ferris EB says, who would you cast as Orson Welles and company in a biopic that focuses specifically on the lead up to and execution of his drunken champagne commercial? Oh God. That's too good. If you haven't seen the Orson Welles champagne commercial, I mean, it's kind of sad because he's an older man and he shows up completely plastered to this champagne commercial, which I'm sure he felt was beneath him. I don't know. Ooh, I don't have an answer for you there, but that would be an interesting movie. Like a movie that takes on the later part of Orson Welles' life and includes that, maybe as could Jack Black pull it off? Maybe he could. I think he could. Kimogio, excuse me, became a YouTube member. Thank you. Welcome to Dan's Movie Club over here on YouTube. Cowjun says, hi, Dan. Finally watched Strange Darling, your recommendation 2 years ago. I recall it wasn't a recommendation. Thanks. What a ride. Wish it had more visibility. Crazy director nearly got fired 2 days into production. Yeah, as I recall, I didn't give it. If it was a recommendation, it certainly was not a very strong recommendation, but it's an interesting film. And Olivia Wilde, her new movie, The Invite, I liked much, much better. It comes out this summer. Carter Ross says, I asked one before the start. Still nothing. If it was skipped or there's tons of questions today, that is huge. If you indeed read mine, ignore this. Sorry, Carter Ross. I'm going back and I'm looking to see. Again, I have all of the super chats kind of in their own thing here. And so I shouldn't be able to skip anything, technically speaking. Unless there was some kind of a glitch or something, either I've answered your question already or something got lost in the way. So I apologize if there was something that was lost, but I have them. Everything's kind of in its own thing here. So I shouldn't be able to skip any question that somebody sent in a super chat. I apologize if something did. Adam Schmidt 625. By the way, it does take a while for me to catch up to super chats too. Adam Schmidt 625 says, been a longtime fan since Screen Junkies, and I love how real you are with your content. You do awesome work that's worth watching. I want to make worthy content too, so I appreciate your advice on getting clicks. Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoy it. Listen, that advice is not going to lead you to multi-millions of dollars, but it's just the way I know how to do things. But thank you for the kind words. Sealy Booth 1489 says, what IP do you think would overall improve their franchise if they released a Lego movie version of their film? My pick is the Jurassic World movies. Ooh, the Jurassic World movies. I think there's a Jurassic Park Lego game that's a lot of fun. Yeah, Jurassic World would be a lot of fun. Lego Indiana Jones, maybe. That could be fun. What I like about the Lego movies is you can take on a franchise like Batman or whatever and have fun inside that franchise and not feel beholden to anything else. So it would be any franchise that can just have fun with itself. Do Lego Star Wars. Why not? It'd be a good time. You can have fun and make fun of things inside and have a kind of winking acknowledgement to the overall franchise. And I think that could be positive for the franchise as well. Tom Prank 7526 says, best and worst Clint Eastwood movies, James Franco. Best and worst Clint Eastwood movies, James Franco. I don't know. I don't necessarily know what that means. Are you calling me James Franco? Or are you best and worst Clint Eastwood movies, James Franco? I feel like it's Saw. I feel like I've been given a puzzle that I can't really figure out. Best and worst Clint Eastwood movies. It's hard to think of off the top of my head. He's made so many, and I don't really know where the James Franco thing comes from. So I'm actually at a loss. I don't know, but I thank you for your question, Dave Franco. Black Bag V says your response about mental health was touching. Thank you again. You're an inspiration. I hope someday I can shake your hand. Hopefully as well. I'm trying to get better at finding places where we can do meetups and stuff like that. Saraba Friend 4701 says, considering declining birth dates and rising cost of living, do you think targeting a Star Wars movie at mostly younger kids is a mistake? I mean, I think it's only a mistake if it doesn't work. And also, this idea that it was targeted mostly at younger kids, I just never got that from like the marketing. I never got like, oh, this is a kid's movie. It's just, it was very heavy, action heavy and very heavy on fighting and very like, to me, it was marketed like your average Star Wars film. So that's another thing I never really got from the marketing, that it was intended to be aimed mainly at children. So, I would even question whether it was actually like, I'm sure that's who Disney wanted to show up, but it never seemed to me as a movie that was made for kids. Like Clone Wars was aimed at kids, the cartoon movie, but I never got the idea that Mandalorian Grogu was. Drew Skizzy says Spider-Man opened 7/31, biggest August ever. Well, I think it's going to do very well. It came in just under the line to be considered a July release. But I think what I love about it is it's going to have a lot of August to play, like that whole last month of the summer. June and July and August, I think, have some real opportunities for us to improve on last summer. This is the last question that I've received. So if you have not sent in a question yet, wow, an hour and a half flew by. If you've not sent your question in yet, then please, no more questions because we're reaching the end of the show. Jason Webster 9300 says, extremely happy about the success of All of a Sudden, Hope, and Colony at Cannes. Many critics are already calling All of a Sudden a masterpiece. Yeah, I mean, it's from what I've read, it's one of those things that critics are probably going to respond maybe a little more strongly to it because, 3+ hours of a movie that's mostly about conversation and stuff. Like, I think that maybe critics have a little bit more patience for it. So I don't know if it's going to break out to like a major audience, but I've heard good things. I like Drive My Car. And that's the thing. Drive My Car was a very long movie and a lot of it was about talking. And I really liked it. So I'm not saying that as a negative about the movie at all. I just think it's more likely to break out among critics than your average audience member. And then, yeah, Hope and Colony. Hope is on my to-see list. I'm really curious about that movie, especially because it seemed to polarize so many people. And that is everything I've got for this week. Let me do a quick run through the comments and see if there's anything that let's see. Best Clint Eastwood and worst James Franco movie. Franco James movies, Eastwood Clint, worst and best. You guys are great. Franco, let's see. This is just the question backwards. Congrats on Dan's World 30, James Franco. James Franco, best and worst movies, Clint Eastwood. See, this is why I'm glad I checked the comments, because that's just movies, James Franco, best and worst Clint Eastwood movies, James Franco. I don't mean to make fun of whoever sent in that question. I'm sure that there is just a typo, but yeah, it means best and worst Clint Eastwood movies, James Franco. Yeah, that's funny. Thank you guys. You gave me a laugh. Let's see. Dan, I saw a snake outside the other day and it reminded me of your story. Yeah, well, I'm happy it wasn't inside. James Franco movies, James Franco. That's funny. Okay, one last question came in while I was looking at these James Franco comments. So this is actually the last question of the day. Actually, Strange Darling is that non-linear movie. Not from Olivia Wilde. Oh, what am I thinking of? And definitely a recommendation for you. One of your favorites. Oh my gosh, what was I thinking of? Because you're totally right. I was thinking of, was it Sorry, Darling? Oh, Don't Worry, Darling. Sorry. Yes, my bad. My brain doesn't always work. I'm sure this is already caught in the comments before it got buried by James Franco stuff. Yes, I apologize. I was thinking of Don't Worry, Darling. You're right. Strange Darling was a movie that I very much enjoyed, and I did give it a recommendation. I think I put it at the end of my year as the best movie you didn't watch or something like that. Yes, yes, you are 100% right. I was 100% wrong. I got my Darling movies mixed up. So yes, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and that was definitely on a recommendation from me. I just got my Darling movies totally wrong in my head. So yes, I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's one of the reasons I like looking at some of the other movies that maybe go under the radar, because maybe a lot of other people have said that they're good, but if I can get one or two people even to check out a movie that they really dug, that means I'm doing my job. So I'm glad you liked it. I apologize. I got my Darling movies mixed up. It will definitely happen again. It's just how it goes. I have an old man brain. Thank you to everybody who sent in a super chat. Thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened to this long hour and a half show about James Franco and media and how they cover the box office, and Robert Pattinson playing Chris Hansen and all kinds of crazy stuff that we talked about it. Real quick from Tony Morrow. Hey Dan, sup? Ben Year, still a big fan. Yeah, what's up, man? What's up, Tony? Nice to see you there. I appreciate it. Getting in just under the wire. So thank you to everybody who sent in a question, who left a super chat, who listened to me talk. Be sure to stay tuned right here. I'm going to have a review of Backrooms up on Thursday afternoon, meaning tomorrow, or Friday morning. It just depends on how quick I can get back from my screening and how long it takes me to do my review and what I have to say. So look out for that. I'll also be watching Spider Noir probably right after we're done here. I'm going to go watch that show. And if I really like what I see and I have something to say, then you can possibly watch for a review of that here on the channel. And I also, like I said, I'm working on that deep dive Oscar project, which I'm currently in the writing phase of. So the research is pretty much done. I'm writing it, and then it's rewriting, fact checking, recording, editing, all that. So we're maybe a little ways out from that, but I want to make sure everything that I'm saying is accurate and true, and that I'm not being guilty of what I just accused other people of doing. So thank you to everybody for watching. Hang in there, stay safe. I'll see you all next time. Bye.